Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. Our topic today is Science Communication at Sea, and our presenter is Ken Kostel from Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. We will have questions at the end, and at any point during the broadcast, you can type in questions in the chat function on your panel, and we will have time at the end for those. So take it away, Ken.
All right, thanks, Lauren. Thanks everyone for joining me. We've got some people here I know who are going to be on the cruise, who are going to be on shore during the AT 4206, the early career scientist cruise, and I think we also have some folks who are joining in from Hui, who are going to be on the joint program student cruise on Neil Armstrong later this month. I'm starting with my camera on first for two reasons. Number one of the messages I'm trying to convey in this presentation is to humanize your science, to embody the messages that you're trying to present. So this is me. I am not a bunch of PowerPoint slides. The second thing is I always want you now, this is my first tip, get used to carrying one of these, a microfiber cloth, so that you can do this to your iPhone camera before you use it every time, both cameras. Or if you're doing outreach, live outreach via your laptop, you can also do that. Much better. But now I'm going to switch away from the camera and onto the slides. Like Lauren said, my name is Ken Kostel. I'm the Director of Research Communications here at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. I've been at sea, probably about a dozen times in the past 8 years, doing outreach of all different sorts. This is roughly how how the presentation is going to fall out today. I want to continue on the topics that John Alberts was covering last week in his presentation about life at sea, but I specifically want to focus on two things of importance to outreach. Number one is deck safety, when you're doing outreach, photographing on deck, things like that, and then managing the internet, managing bandwidth, which is a very real issue for us at sea. And then we're going to talk about social media, a little bit about doing video, some issues regarding blogging and writing specifically, and then I'll wrap it up with some tips on shooting photographs and videos. The first thing with regards to outreach, doing outreach on deck, and especially for our cruise, where we're going to be shooting around Alvin and around Sentry during deck ops, is it's a massively complex undertaking, and it involves a lot of people in a tightly choreographed ballet to get the submarine, in this case a 40,000 pound sub, off the deck and back onto the deck safely. You can see here a yellow line down at the bottom of the screen. We're going to get this later on in our briefing on the ship, but when you're on the ship watching, during deployment and recovery, nobody goes across the yellow line who does not have the express permission of this guy, the launch coordinator, Jefferson Grau in this case. You do not have the permission of the launch coordinator, and you have to also be wearing a work vest and a hard hat. In addition, this is a huge A-frame that puts a lot of power through it and has a lot of force behind it. That is the express responsibility of the chief engineer, who is in the doghouse up above where the camera is placed. If you go anywhere near that during launch and recovery, he needs to okay it. And that's an issue because right over here is a really good vantage point to get the recovery and get the diver coming off the top of it at the end. And there's no sight line because of the Sentry van there. So if you go down to the port quarter, you need to have a spotter who's watching you and who can see the doghouse at the same time, and have, like I said, the chief engineer's permission. Sentry 2, its launch and recovery is complex and very, very well choreographed. This one is probably even more so, probably because you have to do it in very tight space here on the starboard side. It involves the bosun, Patrick Hennessy in our case here, who's going to be on the ship with us. Somebody holding the release pin, two guys with tag lines, a guy on a tugger line on the main line. These two guys here, they're going to be taking the submarine off the cradle and putting it back on, And then recoveries are even more complicated because they involve all these people doing these things in reverse with boat poles and taglines moving around very, very quickly to make sure that the sub is safely back on board. That being said, if you talk to the bosun ahead of time, let him know what you're trying to do, that outreach is a part of your efforts. He can help you get what you want. In this case, he helped me get a camera onto the top of the crane. And I got this shot that, this whole series of the launch and the recovery. And you should also make sure that they know that if it's a part of your grant, that you need to be able to achieve the objectives of your outreach just as much as you need to achieve the objectives of your science. And if you work with people like that, you can get things with people like Patrick, who really loves a challenge like this. You can get cool things like this. This is a shot that I got in May when we did some engineering dives with Alvin out near the Bahamas. Or you work with the chief engineer and you want to go back on that port quarter, you can get things like this. But again, just work with them, let them know what you want to do, let them know that you're aware that you need to work with them and safely so that you're not in the way and jeopardizing the real goal of deck ops, which is to get things on and off the deck safely. The other thing about life at sea is that we're working under constricted bandwidth limitations. We're going to have slightly better bandwidth than normal, which we'll talk about in a second, but everyone will have a data limit. Excuse me. We're operating under 150 megabits per day, but if you need to do large transfers for videos, things like that, we talk to the SSSG, which is Shipboard Scientific Services Group, the technicians, to help facilitate larger transfers. We also need to take control of the communications that your computer is doing all the time in the background. Things like backing up to the cloud, downloading updates, all these things that happen increasingly frequently without you really knowing it. I've installed Little Snitch on my Mac. There are a lot of other activity monitors, and I think some of this material is covered in some handouts that you either have received or you will receive from the folks here at WHOI. And you really need to begin to learn how to either shut things off or mute them. So I would, if you can't figure out whether something is important to leave on or not, talk to your IS department. You should do that anyway, just to help them figure out how to configure your device for minimal bandwidth requirements. At the same time, when we're at sea, you can only have one device on at a time. So you're going to be switching from, if you're shooting with your smartphone, to going back to your computer, you have to go through a sign out, sign in process. But that also means you have to be able to take control of your phone, which has entirely different demands. But that usually is easier accomplished than your laptop. But it's imperative that you learn how to do this, because A, you only get 150 meg a day, and B, we're sharing the same bandwidth. So even if even if you still have your allotment for the day and you're burning through it, you're reducing the bandwidth that everyone else has. A lot of words and numbers here. I don't want you to focus on that for now. This is just for reference if you need it later on. The thing I want you to look at is that all of these, or almost all of these uplink and downlink bandwidths are in kilobits per second, which means that when you get on a ship, you pretty much step back into the 90s, into dial-up era. We're going to have a slightly better bandwidth. I can't remember. I think it's 4 meg up, 2 megs down. But that we don't get all of that all the time. You're sharing it. Number one, there's some things that I'll cover in a second that may limit that. The thing is to remember that these are the real, very real constrictions that you have placed on your day-to-day communications activities. And you're going to experience some frustration. Just don't let it get to you. In addition to simply the size of the pipeline that we have coming off the ship, We have basic infrastructure issues to deal with. And one of them is the position of the satellite dome. You can see here back on the aft of Atlantis in relation to the ship's mast, in relation to the satellite. In this case, I think one of the satellites we're going to have is somewhere here off the coast of, or in geosynchronous orbit above the South America, which means that anytime the satellite is lined up with the main mast to the satellite dome, we experience diminished or blocked communications. There are things you can do if we absolutely need to free up the satellite dome. I was on a cruise 4 years ago or something in the southern hemisphere, and we were spent days on end bow into a northeast wind that put us directly on the course that blocked the satellite dome, and occasionally we just had to turn around and sail a reciprocal heading in order to free up the satellite dome. It can be done. It's not as smooth a ride, and I think a lot of captains and chief mates prefer not to do that. But if it needs to be done, it can be done. Just keep that in your mind, in the future when you're doing work at sea. So with all of these issues, it's difficult, it's expensive. It's something like $30,000 a month for expanded bandwidth per month. And it used to be that you had to buy an entire month at a time. I think there are models coming available to us that we can just purchase segments or into smaller segments. But it is expensive. It can be frustrating. In addition, people who do a lot of outreach face the stigma of self-promotion. I think that is beginning to change. People are seeing it as just a part of what needs to be done. People, you all might be wary of overselling societal relevance, or just the importance of some of what you're doing. You also may not want to oversimplify your results, and it's a time commitment. These are things we're going to have to address. We're going to have to try and get past. But I want to say that to do it well, it does take a time commitment, and there is a cost. I had one NSF program manager tell me that they would not turn down a proposal because of the cost of doing outreach, as long as it made sense. You have to juggle those two things. But his basic point was that it's important. We see that. We know it has a cost. We're willing to fund it, as long as, and actually he said to me that trying to lowball outreach would actually be worse, because they know how much it costs to do it well. So trying to come in too low is going to be a sign that you're not doing it right, or you're not being serious about it. There is also, to a lot of us, a perceived lack of interest. This makes the rounds quite often in science communication talks. It's true to some extent, however. You do need to do it because, like I said, it's going to help your chances in your proposals. You are also ambassadors of science, the funders, your discipline, your lab, an individual expedition. You're also helping to promote your institution, which is nothing to treat lightly. And scientists have habitually are considered some of the more trustworthy people, some of the more trustworthy professions, much as you might think, given some of the debates going on about individual types of science. And it's an opportunity to humanize the science, your voice, your experience, your history, the people around you. And then finally, I would argue that you owe it to the public, to the people who are funding it. And they want to hear from you. They really do. And that gets us into the only communication theory that I'm going to throw in here. And that is that for a long, long time, the science communication and a lot of education operated under something called the deficit model, in which there was a lack, something missing that needed to be filled. And it's increasingly transitioned to an asset model, in which we say we have a great deal, we have a lot of tools, we have a lot of opportunity that we can use to reach people. And I think one of the assets that we have and that we need to acknowledge increasingly is that people are interested in science. They do care about what's going on around them. And we have an increasing number of tools, especially in social media, and opportunities to use these tools to reach more and diverse audiences. A lot of people use it to get their news. This may have gone above half by now, but in addition to that, a third of social media users say that it's an important way for them to get science news, and people are interested in it. It's habitually, okay, cat videos and other sorts of memes aside, and especially in the current cycle of elections, science does register pretty highly among people who use social media regularly. If you're going to be doing it from the ship, though, you have to ask yourselves, which ones am I going to do? What's most effective for me and for my objectives? And we're going to go through a few of these. I think we're probably not going to touch on We're not going to touch on LinkedIn today. But this is the landscape. Okay, Facebook, of course, is the 800-pound gorilla. This is a little bit old. Yeah, 2016. It has fallen off a little bit, but it's still far and away the largest, with Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter falling in pretty close behind. Twitter, this is just some basic information about who's seeing and what is the total volume of information that's going out there. Heavily mobile. But for Twitter in general, some of the things you need to do is you have to be visual. You have to also be active in tagging your collaborators and influencers to be, part of the social discussion. Use hashtags to make your information discoverable, but do research first about what the best hashtags would be. I use TweetDeck here on land because I manage a couple of different Twitter channels. However, I also use it to follow different hashtags and different individual channels, but each one of those has a bandwidth tax that it uses more bandwidth. So when I step onto a boat, I have to shut off TweetDeck. Just use twitter.com. Just use the native application just to be able to manage how much information is coming through. I also threw PhotoPad on here. That is a desktop sort of, not quite Photoshop, but it gives you the ability to quickly construct photographic montages, so you can tell a story in a single image. And I'll show you a little bit about that a little bit later. Instagram is very heavily used, and especially outside the US, and especially by young people. So that's that's who you're talking to when you're out on Instagram. It's also heavily mobile. It was designed that way by Instagram from the beginning. And for me, when I'm working on my desktop and working as part of my day-to-day job, I've had to use some workarounds so that I'm not just working on my phone all the time. Hashtags matter on Instagram. I saw one study that said there was a sort of bimodal distribution for what's most effective, something like 2 to 3 hashtags or 10 to 12. And you'll see that in a lot of people. Sometimes people will just post an image and a bunch of hashtags and they'll be playful, or they'll help you frame what you're seeing. But it is an opportunity to make it discoverable, but also then to add some additional life to it, to frame what you're saying, to, like I said, to be joking. I think in here, I can't remember if this one had it. No, I hashtagged if it follows us home, can we keep it, or something like that. It is difficult to drive engagement from Instagram because it does not allow you to put URLs in, so it sort of keeps you inside the application. You have to keep that in mind if you're trying to get people to go to a blog post or to any other content. Instagram doesn't really let you do that. It does have a character limit, by the way, but don't even go there. Okay, 2,200 characters is a lot. I use Grambler on desktop. I think I mentioned it allows you to schedule posts. It allows you to just work on your keyboard. And then layout and Canva are two similar things to PhotoPad to construct photo montages, but those are web-based. Layout and Canva. PhotoPad, again, is entirely native on your hard drive, so you're not trying to make connection to the internet when you're using it. And then, of course, the 800-pound gorilla, 2 billion. This is probably up still from that. 79% of internet users, but it is falling off a bit, and you're seeing the age skewing older. Very heavily visual still. Every post that I make, I only really do social media for the institution. I don't do it personally, but every post has to have an image, unless it's just a single pithy comment, sort of like a mic drop moment. Everything else is photo or video all the time. Character limit, yes, but please don't. Be visual. Hashtags aren't as popular, of course, on Facebook, but there is one exception that we're going to make that I'm going to show you in a moment. If you're trying to build a following for your as a scientist or for your lab, just engage in the conversation and be social. But remember, as you do get out there, people are going to troll you, and we'll talk about that, I guess, if we're on the ship and when we have to. And then at sea, well, I should say that the regular Facebook feed is a phenomenal bandwidth hog. And we get around that very often by using the mobile site, m.facebook.com. That reduces the bandwidth requirements of Facebook, but still allows you to use it in a recognizable way. Okay, if Cheryl Davis is working, she'll be happy about this one. We always try and reach out, and especially to funders. So I'm using NSF as the example here, but if you're getting NASA funding, you tag at NASA, EPA, etc., and across all of the channels. And in addition to that, there's a hashtag that we use even on Facebook is NSF funded. Others that I'm going to encourage you to use and that I use often, UNOLs, if I'm talking about the ship, use your home institution. Let them know that you're out there representing them, and they will, or hopefully. Well, I will also encourage you who are going to see to let your communications department know that if you intend to post, to look for it, and then they can repost what you're doing and amplify anything that you put up. Other hashtags that we hope to use, National Deep Submergence Facility. We don't have an individual feed for NDSF, but we do try and hashtag it. Alvin, Sentry, Atlantis, and ECS Cruise for the current AT 4206. For Twitter, these last two are most important. The accepted order for a post, general order, is to use text, then your tags, your individual, your other channels, then hashtags, and then a link. And of course, try to work your tags, if at all possible, into the post itself. And you only use one link. That's, it helps focus people into what you're trying to drive them to. And in this case, this is a very inelegant example on the right here of where I used, I think, Canva. I can't remember one of the photo applications that I mentioned earlier, just to do a simple montage of Sentry on its 500th dive a couple of weeks ago at the Jaco Scar. And yeah, this doesn't show you what it can do, but it's very, very easy, much easier than Photoshop. Just to drag a bunch of photos together, arrange them, and you can begin to tell a story in a single image instead of a whole series of them. The key thing about doing social media is just get to the point, be concise, say it quickly, get out of the way. But along the way, try to have some value added, some voice to what you're doing. And these are just a whole bunch of brain dump of ways that you can approach doing that. Be active, be valuable, be a mensch, be defiant, whatever. And it's just try to get you to think about how you're presenting yourself online. The key point, though, is content is always king or queen, and especially visual content. That being said, learn the rules of the individual channel. You know, there are written and unwritten rules, and like many things, like like photography, which we're going to get to, and like writing, learning the rules allows you to break them, but consciously and for a purpose. And always be concise, and above all, learn your audience. And in particular, on the right, we are going to be doing a fair bit of classroom outreach, so we have to be able to enter the mind of I think we've got 6th and 7th grade so far. So video is phenomenally important. 73% of internet traffic in 2016, and that's going to grow. 1 billion views per month on YouTube. They're the 2nd largest search engine after Google. But what's the difference? We use both at Hui. We use YouTube and Vimeo. Vimeo or YouTube is bigger. It has a little bit more constriction and issues. A lot of trolls. The copyright claims are much more difficult to deal with, and we find that our average view time on YouTube lags quite a bit to that of the Vimeo audience. Vimeo gives you slightly better quality, and the key thing for me, or that is very helpful, is if I put up a video and they later find an issue with it, I forgot to put an NSF logo on it, somebody all of a sudden noticed that I misspelled something, I can fix it and re-upload and keep the same URL. But YouTube, you get a completely new URL. And I know some of you are going to be doing video, so if you're doing it, get started now, practice, and keep producing. You have to keep producing. You have to, get over the nervousness that you might feel about presenting yourself online and in person. And replace that nervousness with enthusiasm and authenticity. Be painfully aware of your lighting and audio, especially audio when you're on deck in a ship. There are some places on Armstrong, and if I can meet up with the students at some point, I can point out to a few where there's just an incredible amount of resonance to the point where it's uncomfortable to stand in places. And wind is a real issue. Always be aware of the wind blowing around you, because that's going to register very strongly in your microphone. Get out of the wind. Branding. I put this in here because I want, so in addition to going and meeting your communications people, I also want everyone on the early career scientist cruise to go pay a visit to your university gift shop and pick up a couple of shirts that have the name of your university sort of on the left chest. That would be visible if you're in a video. It just says who you are and where you're from, and it keeps it, it's not onerous to see it there. People expect to see things like that. It helps tell people just who you're connected to, and the folks back at your institution will be very happy that you're out there representing. Aspect ratio, we're going to talk a lot more about this in person. It's much easier to explain, but horizontal is 16:9. That's what you're seeing right now. And that is what you want to see if you're expecting a piece of video to be presented to you on your on a desktop. It can, of course, it also plays everywhere else. But when people hold their phones to watch video, very often they hold it upright, so that doesn't work as well. In which case, if you're expecting a piece of video to be primarily in social media, I would say shoot it square instead of vertical. Vertical limits you to a very narrow, again, 16:9, but the reverse, 9:16. It doesn't play well anywhere else but on your phone. So I would say keep the two, horizontal and square, as your main modes of shooting. And then at C, we should always talk to the technicians before you upload to one of these two. They can help you maybe do it without impinging on your bandwidth limits. We'll be doing some live, but we won't be doing Facebook Live. But I'm going to keep this in here because in day-to-day, it's a really good way for you to begin to build an audience on social media if you're trying to do this more regularly for in your science. Um, a lot of people do tend to tune into live content, and people, like it says here, people comment at 10 times the rate. And you can use that as an opportunity to engage with people, respond to comments, and get people engaged in discussion. And they watch it three times longer than produced videos. There's a conscious decision to say, I'm going to join this live broadcast and see where it's going. That being said, at the bottom of the list is a 2 megabit uplink requirement, and Facebook's servers constantly ping back to make sure that they have a good feed to keep good image quality. I've been able to do Facebook Live from the deck of a ship, even with a bandwidth, even with less than 2 megabit connection, but it does drop off pretty soon after. We're going to be using 2 other platforms, and I don't have a slide on these, unfortunately. Number one is Zoom, which we've been using for our pre-cruise meetings, for those of you who are involved in them. It does have I think it's 500K bandwidth requirement, and then we're going to use Google Hangout through a group called Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants to do live classroom interactions. And Google Hangouts also has something in the order of 500K bandwidth requirement, and seems to do pretty well. I've been able to use it when somebody was in less than ideal conditions where were they? Somewhere northeast of New Zealand a couple months ago. And these are great things to, like I said, to get behind the scenes in your lab, give how-tos or engage in discussions, show tours of ships, I guess for us, or to cover events. If you're having like a science open house or something, you can just quickly take people live to the event. Okay, on to blogging. This is probably the one thing that everybody's going to remember. Unfortunately, Jorn Barger in 1997, I think it was in fact November, coined the word weblog. That was in typical internet fashion, corrupted to weblog and then to the word blog. So that it is, only since 2000. Who knew? And why would you do that instead of social media? Well, there are a couple of reasons. Number one, there's more people are just simply on the internet than are on social media. You're not constrained by a culture, because each one of these social media channels does have a distinct culture, and each one has an artificial intelligence behind it, running it, deciding what information gets served where, to whom, and when. And that's always changing. And it's one of the biggest frustrations that we have on the communication side is trying to guess what's going on. And if anyone says they figured it out, they're wrong. They don't know. And even if they really have by accident figured it out, a couple of days later, it's going to change and they're wrong again. And in addition, when you begin to engage in a regular series of blogging on land or at sea, you're no longer sort of clouded by this transactional sort of feeling that you're out there for shares or likes or followers or whatever. You're more genuine. You're saying, this is what I think, this is what I'm experiencing, this is something that I think is important right now. Most importantly, you're free to tell your stories the way you want to. And then you create content that you can share on social media, and you can frame to adhere to the culture of that particular channel, except for Instagram, which you can't link to, but maybe there's a way around that. And it lets you get at, like I said, what I think are the 6 most powerful words in the English language, and lets you tell stories. You say this to somebody at the loudest party you're at, and you instantly have their attention. All the things that go on a research cruise, the questions, the surprise, conflict, tension, resolution, newness, people, exploration and discovery, all those things that are inherent on a ship setting sail are also the things that I think make a good story. But that being said, those operate outside. Back in the background is the more mundane and the drudgery of storytelling, and that is you got to plan, you got to think about what you're doing, you got to focus on it occasionally, set yourself a schedule. But like social media, be brief, be simple. If you're going to do it, if you're going to say you do it, do it. But be patient with yourself. Don't feel like you have to tell every story all at once. Plan it out. This is from a blog that I did in 2011 with very limited bandwidth, even worse than what we're going to experience, and even if we didn't have the extra bandwidth. And I spent a couple of days thinking about all the stories, or all the possible topics that I could tell, how I could tell those stories, what order I might tell them, shuffling them around, breaking them up, putting things back together. Partly was I needed to be very careful with this stories because this was, within 3 months after the explosion of the nuclear power plants at Fukushima Daiichi. And I knew a lot of people from NSF and from the State Department were going to be tuning in. So I had to be careful how I was going to be telling what I was going to be saying. But it helped me alleviate some of the issues that might come from just all of a sudden feeling rushed and got to get something out, got to get anything out. Don't ramble. Be aware of what you're saying. Don't be lost. Don't pretend like something. Don't think that you've got the answers to everything. Don't insult people. Don't write when you're angry or hungry or frustrated or tired. Or if you do, okay, if you have to get things on paper, do that. But then come back later and say, okay, what did I say? How did I say it? And don't try to be anything you're not. If you're not funny, don't try to be funny. If you're funny, it'll come out. And also, a lot of jokes get created within the confined spaces of a research expedition. They're very inside jokes. They don't always play to the wider world who's not been, confined with you for a month. Read good writing. Learn the second one is probably the most difficult to teach, this difference between stories and subjects. You know, And you're not going to just do it whenever. You're going to have to be committed to it and plan and do it. And sometimes, yeah, like a lot of small businesses, a lot of blogs end up gathering dust. And even if you are committed and you keep doing it, you're going to wonder for a long time if anyone's listening. And then when you find out that people do listen, you're going to find a lot of people who disagree with you. But keep at it. Just keep going. And you will quickly learn that, well, writing is hard. Writing well is harder, and writing short is the hardest thing. And Mark Twain said it much better than I did. And it's not new. People think, when Twitter came up with that 140 word character, it's like, oh my God, writing short is such a different medium. Well, okay, it's been around with us for a while. Baby Shoes, Never Worn is it's one of the most famous short stories ever written, reputedly, by Ernest Hemingway. And of course, you recognize the Golden Rule. Here's an example of somebody I turn to for inspiration all the time, Roy Peter Clark. But look around. Advertising is just a wellspring of places that make every word do multiple things. You just squeeze all the information out of it. Memes do it, tweets do it, and then practice. It's hard to edit yourself. Edit others. I would have written that tweet so much differently. I would have revised just that sentence or that abstract like this. How could I say things? How could somebody else? It's always easier to tell somebody else how to do stuff. Edit other people first, and you'll get used to it. This is directly from Roy Peter Clark. 5 things that you can do to help hone your language. And then the last one is from me. This is especially the case, or it's more the case when you're trying to get from 800 words to 500, not so much from 550 to 500. And it's sort of a corollary of Kill Your Babies. We're going to learn what is really important. And, you're not losing stuff if you have to cut out big chunks of what you've written. Save it for later. It might be a whole other story. This is a shout out to Rebecca Fowler, who she sent me a list of the books that she refers to frequently, and I looked up and said, "Oh yeah, I have all those books right here on my shelf." So, but she reminded me, and these are good ones just to have around or to page through. Verlin's is relatively new and also about writing short. Start strong, and we're going to get to this later about structuring in a moment. So how to structure your writing. Start strong, and then tell your reader what you're going to tell them. That in writer's terminology is the lead and the nut. And then you get on with what you're going to say. Avoid jargon. You've heard these before. Unless it works in your favor, I'm going to show you where to break that. Be active. Try and just rip the passive out of what you write. And even in scientific articles, mix things up. You use a long sentence, follow it with a short one. Let people breathe. Long paragraph, short paragraph. And this might be counterintuitive, but I always tend to start deleting adjectives and adverbs. I don't want to necessarily tell people what something was. I want to show them. Figure out ways to pare your writing down so that it conveys the details without having to beat people on the head with what those details are. On the left is how science articles are typically structured. Give your background, give the methods, the details, and your results. And with your results, because you've done all this other stuff ahead of it, we turn that on its head. And you want to lead with the results. You want to start with the flourish, then explain why that's important, and then end with the supplementary information. And then you can end with a re-explanation of the results. Getting close to the end, I want to give you a couple of examples of what I thought were kind of good writing, interesting. This was from a blog post last year, I think, by a graduate student. It was her first research cruise, and I think her first blog. And she sent me her blog post about getting ready. And I read this title, and a tiny bit of me inside died, because I've seen these before, stream of consciousness things, and they just ramble. But she gave me this. It's human. How many pencils should I bring? I take out 5 pencils, tell myself that's not enough. Leave the lab, go to my office, immediately panic that 5 pencils is not enough, run back to the lab, pack the entire box of pencils before I forget to. I do the same thing with thin tip, regular, and silver Sharpies. Who hasn't experienced this? I think that was me trying to get out of the house today. But she's doing it for a research expedition. Now she's human, and you're along for the ride with her. Here, knowing the rules lets you break them. This is from John McPhee. Suppose you're in Vermont on a field trip with the world's 10 or 15 most knowledgeable Appalachian geologists. They gather around an outcrop, and soon an argument heats up about delaminated basements, welding batholiths, and controversial aspects of tectonostratigraphy. You're on the low side of the learning curve and you don't even know terrain from terrain. What do? Put a tape recorder on the outcrop. It has no fossil control. Just, geologists, if you're listening, you guys have a phenomenal tool at your disposal. Your language is so rich and vivid. And there is a trend in social media these days to explore the etymology of words, where you just turn your attention to a word and take it apart and explain where it comes from, why it says what it says, and how it's related to the world. There's a beautiful passage in Coming into the Country, McPhee's first book in the series going across the US and looking at geology, where it's just a long run-on paragraph where and I think it's kind of his formative moment, where he was sitting in geology class as an undergrad, and the professor is just talking about all these different land formations, and he's just listening to the language and realizing how descriptive it is. And I read that. I was on a commuter train coming home from my job in Chicago. I think it was in the middle of the cornfields. And I'm reading this thing curled up on a seat because I was on the last stop. And I just giggled out loud. It was so beautiful. He took that dictate that you don't use jargon, and he just turned it on its head. He said, I'm going to use all jargon, because it's so interesting. Sometimes it works. Be careful when you do it, and do it consciously. And all of these disciplines have something like that. On the left, geologists, okay, yeah, you've got that rich language. It's all about landscape and how landforms came to be. It's a story. Biologists, you got these crazy creatures with wild names, Alvanella. Where did that come from? How did, tell the story of the nomenclature of the world around us. And chemists, every element on the periodic table has a story. Find it, tell it. And finally, it's not always about the science. I'm going to give a quick video here that is really almost all jargon. It's about, well, I'm going to let him start it, and then I'll fill in the rest and finish it.
Today, I'm going to deliver news to Professor Andre Linde, who is the founding father of inflation. So inflation is the theory about the bang of Big Bang. It explains why we have all this stuff in the universe. So today I'm going to tell him our experiment, Bicep 2, based at South Pole, has found the smoking gun evidence of inflation. He has no idea that I'm coming.
Okay. Andre Linde, a couple of decades ago, put forward this idea that there was a moment after the Big Bang that permitted the universe to form. It's called inflation, where all of a sudden the Big Bang occurred, matter formed and began to expand into the newly formed universe, and then it could have either turned inward and disappeared, but it should have just turned inward and disappeared, but it didn't. It all of a sudden experienced this rapid growth into what's called inflation. And when he postulated that, he was excoriated. He was just shouted down, "You're nuts. How could you? You have no evidence for this." And this is the moment now when his grad student is going to come to his door and tell him, "You were right. And here's the evidence." From this point on, it's all jargon. And they don't explain it. It's all statistics. But I want you to watch his wife's reaction, who just opened the door, and then I want you to watch Lindy's reaction.
Wow. So I have a surprise for you. Wow. It's 5 sigma at 0.2. He's coming. Yes. What? Just a second. It is 5 sigma. As clear as day. R of 0.2. Can you repeat it again? R 0.2 plus minus 0.2.
Okay. We're not going to have this moment, probably. We're not going to have eureka moments. But we're going to have moments that are just simply human. And that's what I want to capture. That's what I always find very interesting, the most interesting. When you're standing around in a lab and somebody says, "I have no idea what's going on here. Look at this." Or when somebody just says, "Huh, that's weird." And that's what it means to humanize science, to just simply say that it's a process. It's not perfect. It's the best we have, and it's full of successes and setbacks, but always moving forward. Oh, okay. We have a few more minutes before I stop to take questions. I just want to run quickly through some photo tips. This is from the engineering cruise on Alvin that I did back in May. This lovely image. I think it horribly fails because I didn't look at the edges and see that his feet are cut off, his feet are obscured. It's a little cluttered here and there. This should be a little higher. So if I would have stepped back and moved to the left a tiny bit at this moment, because I was just watching this, would have been a much better photo. So don't get focused just on what's in the middle of your image. Look around the frame all the time and feel where the focus of the attention of the action is. We're gonna, everybody watches Alvin because that's the big shiny thing on deck. I turned around and I saw, oh, everybody else is looking at Alvin too. So I stepped behind everyone and showed that everyone is watching Alvin and framed that. It's not the best photo again, but it happens because you're looking around at the whole of the action that's going on around you. look for moments. This is something I knew happens before every dive, and I've been trying to get this for a long, long time. And I asked the launch controller if I could step all the way back to the almost to the transom with the guys, and in particular here, as he's showing the pilot inside the sphere that he has 6 pins from all 6 drop weights. And until the pilot sees those and counts them, they can't dive. So he's giving visual confirmation that they can do it. Don't center your subject. Sure, Alvin is the important thing. The Alvin and the small boat are important here, but so is just the simple expanse of the ocean that we're in. And you can drive that home by keeping Alvin off the center of the screen. However, there are times when it is important. And in this case, where there are a lot of leading lines and a good, strong visual element surrounding it, it makes sense to stick the center of action right in the middle of the frame. And then finally move around, look for other vantage points. Ask if you can be someplace that you know you're going to be able to get a shot. Ask the bosun first, though. The bosun, the launch controller in the case of Alvin launch and recovery, and the chief engineer are the key people, though. At all times, you want to let them know where you are and what you want to do. That's it. I want to stop now just to take questions. There's a couple of other slides with lists of tips that you can see if you download the slides when Lauren sends it around to everyone who was there. So Lauren, if you want to jump in and moderate questions.
Yes, thank you, Ken. While we are waiting for some questions to come in, would we be able to go back to slide 39? The audio cut out while you were explaining that one.
Oh, okay. Let's see. What number, or what was the title?
It was number 39. It was about the difference of subjects and stories.
Oh, well. Okay. Oh, before you start. Yeah. Okay. This all speaks to the need for preparation at all times. Reading good writing, it just helps prime the pump. The difference between stories and subjects, I think what I was saying is it's a habitually very difficult one to learn. And we'll be exploring that a lot while we're at sea. The example I used was hydrothermal vents. Okay, that's a subject. The story might be the fact that there were no biologists on the first cruise that discovered hydrothermal fluid flow. It was all geologists, and they didn't know what to really do with the stuff that they were bringing up. It's blogging. I think this was within the context of blogging. So blogging is still very visual, so you need to learn how to be a good photographer, videographer, and then you need to plan, give yourself a deadline. Write first, get it down in words when you when you do sit down, then go back and edit, and be willing to kill things that you think are the best. I've deleted some of the best writing I've ever done, but it just didn't work in the moment. So the phrase that we use in writing a lot is being willing to kill your babies. That's it.
Thank you, Ken.
Sure.
We have a question that just came in, and it is, how do we get involved / join your research cruise?
Unfortunately, the cruise is full. It was set up months ago. But join online. We are going to be doing social media. We'll probably be going out on the AGU channel, the UNOLS channel, and anybody else who's going to be reposting things that we are. We'll be using hashtag ECS Cruise, and we will be posting blogs to the UNOLS blog page. So take a look there. You can follow virtually, and then we'll be going live back to the AGU meeting, and I think 3 days in a row, and then we'll also be going to some classrooms live.
Great. It sounds like there's a lot of ways to keep up with the activities.
Oh yeah.
And one more question. Aside from a blog, which social media platform do you think is the most effective for creating a narrative?
Um, well, yes. No, you can create a narrative out of all of them. You know, they all just have their limitations. Certainly Facebook with its 63,000 some odd character count allows you to do great individual narratives or do narratives in individual posts. Um, but you know, take up the challenge. Try and do narratives in 200 or 280 characters. Do, you know, multiple tweet narratives. Instagram Stories is a phenomenal new tool in developing narratives visually. Um, and I didn't cover that because it's a whole different milieu. But I would say just about anything will let you do narratives. It's just how are you equipped to tell your narrative? If it's entirely visual, find a more visual way to do it. But I think the short answer is probably Facebook is the easiest way to do it immediately.
Great, thank you. And we have a few more minutes for any remaining questions that are out there. And just a reminder, this webinar session is being recorded and will be available online on the registration page in the next few days, likely early next week.
I forgot. Did I swear?
Oh, no, you're good.
Okay, good. I kept
Do we have
forgetting.
any more? Let's see. I think all the questions are answered. So thank you so much for presenting today, Ken, and thank you to all of our attendees for joining us.
Yeah, and thank you to AGU for making this happen, and thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thanks everyone. Bye. And we are